Words of cheer for desponding disciples. In the world ye shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. There is an island in a distant sea, from whose shores the fishermen sail in tiny crafts to procure the treasures of the deep. During their absence, thick mists often descend and cover high land, cliff, and beacon, with so thick a veil that these hardy mariners are left without a mark by which to steer their laden barks. But in these dull hours they are not left to wander unguided on the pathless sea. When the time for their return arrives, the women of that islet, mothers, wives, sisters, and daughters, descend to the shores and raise the voice of song. Borne on the quiet air, their voices soon fall sweetly on the ears of the loved ones on the sea. Guided by the well-known sounds, they steer their boats in safety to the shore. And thus to thee, O Christian, comes the voice of love from the celestial shore. As thou wanderest, a bewildered child of tribulation, of the misty sea of life, hearken, be of good cheer, is the cry that greets thee. It comes from Jesus, who has overcome this very world, which is the sin and source of your trials. His conquest of your adversary is the pledge of your victory. Therefore, be of good cheer. There is no person living who does not at times feel a spirit of discouragement stealing over him. As a cloud obscures the moon, as mists shroud the sunbeams, so despondency spreads a curtain before the mental eye, and everything in and about the soul assumes a dull, somber, threatening aspect. Clouds and storms frown loweringly from above, difficulties wall up life's path, dangers like spectral faces with large malignant eyes gaze fiercely through the gloaming, and the soul, shuddering with terror and shrinking from further conflict, longs yet fears to die. This spirit is not peculiar to one class, but is common to all. It assails the weary and feeble woman, borne to the dust by bodily affliction, oppressed with a multitude of domestic perplexities, harassed with innumerable petty but consuming cares. And if she submit to it, she loses heart and hope. The sun of her life sets untimely, and she weeps away her existence in self-consuming sadness. It is equally powerful in its sway over the high-minded merchant and the lusty artisan, who in their dark days seem walled in by forebodings of bankruptcy, poverty, and the poor house. It often affects Christians too, and hiding the cross from their vision, leads them to contemplate their past sins and remaining corruptions, until their redemption seems hopeless. And more mendacious still, it stalks into the pulpit, whispers in the ear of the minister, insinuating that he does not enjoy the confidence of his people, that he is not appreciated, that his gifts are diminishing, and that he had better secularize himself as speedily as possible. Thus a despondent spirit assails all classes and professions, and no man who suffers from it need deem himself peculiarly tried. As it assails him, so it assails all. But there is a vast difference between different persons in the degrees of power which this spirit attains over them. In some, owing to natural temperament, to the state of the health, or more frequently to the absence of a prompt and vigorous resistance to its influence, it gains the empire of the soul. Such persons, like the unfortunate Cowper, sink into settled melancholy. They become the victims of a morbid sensitiveness. They acquire a marvelous power to discern evil in everything, but are blind to all that is lovely and beautiful in life. Its thorns they diligently gather and hug with unnatural fondness to their pierced bosom, fascinated, it would seem, by the ills which so cruelly lacerate them. But on the flowers which bloom with beauty at their feet they refuse even to gaze. There is scarcely anything in human life except guilt, more to be dreaded than such a state as this. To avoid it, its incipient symptoms must be manfully resisted. To prevent its first shadows from falling darkly on the soul is impossible. Those shadows fall unbidden, suddenly, apparently without cause, and often in the midst of our most sunny hours. Even the mighty spirit of Napoleon felt them. When he stood before his pavilion to witness his grand army cross the Niemen on its way to Moscow, after its almost innumerable battalions, with their standards floating proudly in the breeze, their helmets and bayonets glistening in the sun, had defiled in his presence and presented to his gaze an army such as no previous commander had ever led into the field, he is said to have suddenly assumed a grave and gloomy aspect. Turning from the spectacle before him, he hummed a martial air and hastened within the imperial tent. What did this act signify, if not that dark shadows fell on his heart, and that he inwardly trembled before some spectral evils like a common man? What these shadows are, and whence they come, are mysteries. Perhaps they proceed from the soul itself, which, in the midst of its most glowing triumphs, remembers its inherent weakness, beholds itself as a mere spark, glimmering like the tiny glowworm amidst the infinite, and liable to be trodden into dust by the foot of almighty power. Or perhaps they fall from the earthly objects we almost unconsciously choose as suns and stars to light us on our pilgrimage, instead of deriving all our light from God. But no sooner do we look for light than, lo, the shadows come, merciful shadows, if we understand their meaning. They teach us our creature suns are opaques. They bid us fly from them to him who liveth in light, who is light, whose presence casts no shadow on a trustful mind, and who crieth to us from afar, Be of good cheer. To fly from a despondent spirit into the light becomes therefore a first duty. To yield to it is the death of happiness and usefulness. A life of darkness is wretchedness. And who, with despondency preying like a ghoul upon his spirit, can achieve any great result in life? No man, for melancholy robs the mind of strength. It is as rottenness to the bones. It is a mental marasmus, under whose influence the noblest powers will pine away into desuetude and desiccation. There was once an eccentric instructor of youth, who, instead of following the ancient and approved fashion of beating knowledge into unwilling skulls with a rod, was accustomed to help a perplexed scholar through a crooked problem by a word of explanation, and by urging him to a successful effort with the exclamation, Never despair. This never despair became the battle cry of his school, and the source of many an algebraic victory. How much more should the Be of Good Cheer of the blessed Christ become thy battle cry, O Christian, and thy charm against the despondency in the great strifes of life? It possesses a mystic force beyond all the amulets of Oriental fame. Be of good cheer, never despair. How cheerfully it echoes along the chambers of the soul! What a call to its sinking energies! How it silences the silly prattle of fear! how it revives the silent, drooping heart of hope. Never despair? No, never. Be of good cheer always. Yes, always. What, not when one has failed, as I have done, after 10,000 efforts to rise into spiritual triumph? What can I do but despair? Is this your inquiry, discouraged disciple? Do? You can trust. As when one is fainting, he falls helpless into the open arms of a friend, so you, in your perfect weakness, can leave all other aids alone and sink in self-despair into Christ's bosom. But he will let me utterly fall. Hush, dear reader! That saying is an insult to Christ. It exposes a conviction on your part that Christ can be guilty of falsehood and lying. Forbear the doubt, therefore. You can sink into Christ and rise to spiritual life and victory. Therefore be of good cheer. But what can I do but despair? Exclaims a mercantile reader. I have failed in business. I have thereby undeservedly lost the confidence of my brethren. I am poor now, and I see no ground for hope. Tush, man, never despair. Great powers lie slumbering in your soul. They only wait your summons. Rise therefore in the majesty of an unconquered will. Be superior to your misfortunes. Assert the supremacy of mind over circumstances. Begin life anew. Assault your obstacles with sturdy blows, and look well to him who says, Commit thy way unto the Lord, trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. Be of good cheer. But I hear another voice. It comes from the delicate invalid, the exhausted mother. I have nothing to hope for, is her language. My health is gone, my hopes crushed. Motion is toil to me, and existence pain. Darkness is in my soul, and I am weary of life, and yet I dare not die. Must I not despair? No, child of affliction, no. Even you must hope. Never despair. Jesus loves you. That thought is a cheerful ray of light in which you may rejoice at least a little. True, you are a physical sufferer. Perhaps you always will be. Yet look yonder at that cloud, which through the sky sailing long, doth cross in her career the rolling moon. I watched it as it came, and deemed the dark opaque would blot her beams. But melting like a wreath of snow, it hangs in folds of wavy silver round, and clothes the orb with richer beauties than her own. Then passing, leaves her in light serene. Do you understand the poet, lady? As that cloud clothes the moon in richer beauty, so shall your afflictions patiently borne robe your suffering spirit in lustrous, which will make it all the more precious to its Redeemer forever. Yes, forever. Can you not then endure a little hour of suffering for an eternity of increased bliss? Ay, you can. Then let hope sing its song once more in your soul. And whatever may be your pangs, bear them gazing most lovingly in the face of Jesus, and saying, Lord, I will never despair. Thus applied, this motto has force to keep the mind from falling into confirmed melancholy, and to lead it to the height of its power to achieve great and good things. For while despondency unmans it, a hopeful spirit, by creating a consciousness of power, sets all its faculties into vigorous motion. Thus the artist Correggio, when young, saw a painting by Raphael. Long and ardently did the thoughtful boy gaze on that picture. His soul drank in its beauty, as flowers drink moisture from the mist. It walked to the consciousness of artistic power, burning with enthusiasm and enkindled genius, the blood rushing in his brow and fire flashing from his eyes, he cried out, "I also am a painter." That conviction carried him through his initial studies. It blended the colors on his palette, it guided his pencil, it shone on his canvas, until the glorious Titian, on witnessing his productions, exclaimed, "Were I not Titian, I would wish to be Correggio." Thus, by refusing to despair of success, and by a summons to his powers, Correggio drew them forth and triumphed. And it must be so with thee, O Christian. If you ever attain to happiness, holiness, and usefulness, be of good cheer must be your watchword in every strife. If you are borne down today by force or guile, you must shout your battle cry and resume the contest tomorrow. If the whelming waves overflow you, and you sink in deep waters, you must gather fresh strength from the mysterious depths of your soul and from God, and once more mount the surface and rejoice. However oppressed, hindered, crushed, tried, walled in, or tempted, still let your eye be fixed on God, and your cry be heard echoing above all your foes, "I will be of good cheer." Do this, and you are sure to win some spoils, and to attain the glorious goal toward which you run. Onward, Christian, though the region where thou art be drear and lone, God hath set a guardian legion very near thee. Press thou on.